Okay, we're finally getting around to doing this video, like 2 weeks after the chapter came out, alright? But better late than never. Okay, here's the question for you, ladies and gentlemen. Is Sanji a cyborg? Vote now, yes or no. Do 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 do. Yeah, these buttons don't do anything. Remember back when YouTube had annotations, like you could add little speech bubbles in the video, or you could have like little areas you can click on to take you to other videos? There were like choose your own adventure channels back in the day. Aw, man, 2008 nostalgia, let me tell you. Okay, but no. Is Sanji a cyborg or a modified human, or are they the same thing? Okay, so here's where this came from, all right? Chapter 1023 of One Piece. Spoilers, I guess, but once again, it's been out for like over 2 weeks at this point. We had a lot of information, which is why it took this long to make this video. We got the reveal of King's race. He's a part of the Lunarians. We don't know much about them yet, but they have the ability to manipulate fire, and they were, they lived on top of the Red Line, and they got pushed off. I'm already going off on a tangent about that. And then we found out, like, Zoro's past involving Ushimaru, and then he also used the three-sword style and his relation to Ryuma, and I'm already going off on a tangent about that. Alright, that's the point. That's the problem, alright? But there was also information about Sanji in that chapter, too. It's just the Zoro stuff and the King stuff kind of took precedence, alright? So, Sanji's fighting against Queen, and he's using his Diable Jambe, right? Lighting his leg on fire and, like, attacking Queen. And Queen's like, whoa, you can light your leg on fire. How the hell can you do that? Oh, wait, that's right. You're Judge's kid. So you've had the little bit of the genetic modifications. Yeah, I understand. And, of course, Sanji's like, oh, screw that. I'm not a member of the Vinsmokes. I'm not a member of the damn Germa. I can light my leg on fire purely with the passion that burns in my heart. And Queen's kind of like, that's the explanation you went with? Really? You light your leg on fire and you just assumed it was the passion of your heart? And he's like, yes, absolutely. Like, okay, yeah, no, you're totally a cyborg. Like, I am not a cyborg! I am a human! And then so Sanji just charges at Queen, right? Now, the way that Queen refers to Sanji, or a modified human in this case, is a little different from the way it was referred to up until now. So we have cyborgs in One Piece like Frankie and Kuma, and then we have modified humans like Reiju, Ichiji, Niji, and Yonji, the Vinsmoke siblings, right? The idea is that a cyborg is originally human, but then has different machinery and technology attached to them, sometimes on the outside, sometimes on the inside. Frankie installed a fridge inside of his stomach. Vegapunk installed laser cannons on, Kuma. That is how it is, right? Whatever. It's like a human that has, cybernetic modifications. A cyborg, okay? Artificial humans, not artificial humans, but modified humans, like the Vinsmoke siblings, their changes were more genetic, because Vegapunk, Queen, and Judge all worked on the same scientific crew, MADS, because they were all mad scientists, and they cracked the human genome or the lineage factor or DNA, and they started tinkering around with that in different ways. Vegapunk, made, pacifistas, and then he also started to develop, artificial devil fruit technology. Queen was working on viruses, of course, that would change DNA, and then Judge started working on the cloning project in order to revive the Germa, this kingdom that lived like 300 years ago, right? Now, I also want to bring up Sora, Sanji's mother and Judge's wife here, because this is kind of important. Just by the idea of making this video, I'm like, how did Judge and Sora meet? Because I'm starting to think, like, this doesn't really work for, like, Judge to be like, all right, I'm just gonna start, using dating apps and going out there in the world, and, first date with Sora, they're at, like, a fancy restaurant, like, eating steak, and then Sora's like, okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself, and Judge is like, well, the main reason why I wanted to go out with you was because I want you to become my wife so that you can give birth to my children, which I will genetically modify with the mad science that I learned working for Vegapunk many years ago. And then those children will grow up to obey every single command I give them without question, essentially becoming super soldiers, which will then work in the evil empire of the Germa, which I am descended from, that I will build a massive empire around, and then we'll take over the entirety of the North Blue. Also, I like your hair, you know. And so that I don't think that's how it went, because I think Sora would have just been like, "Okay, yeah, I'm leaving now. That's the great dinner, you know." Okay. I actually like to think that Judge and Sora had somewhat of a normal relationship, you know, well before, you know, Judge kind of went crazy with the cloning tech and everything. They might have actually met when Judge was still just a scientist working for Vegapunk, and, you know, they dated for a while, and then Judge eventually just lost himself in that obsession to revive the Germa, right? And then at that point, Sora just kind of went along with it because she loved Judge, and then, you know, later she found out all the stuff that was happening with the genetic modifications, and that's why she downed a bunch of drugs to try to reverse the procedure, which, from what we understand, up until this point, we were led to believe Sanji was the only one that was immune to that, okay? Because we see the flashback with Sanji and all of his siblings training with their superhuman abilities, right? Like, there's one scene where basically all of the Germa siblings are on top of a balcony, like 5 stories up, and then Judge and a doctor are there, just be like, "All right, Reiju, jump off the 5-story balcony." So she does, and she lands, and, you know, she's fine because she's genetically altered, and then Ichiji and then Niji both do it, and then Yonji jumps off, and they're like, "All right, Sanji, jump off the balcony," and Sanji's like, and he's like 5 at this point, and he's like, Dad, do I have to? And he's like, "Come on, Sanji, jump. It's just 5 stories. Come on." Just like, I can't. I'm afraid. And so all the other tests they did, you know, for strength and speed and stamina and everything, all the other siblings passed with flying colors, and then Sanji was the only one that was lagging behind. And so the doctor finally arrived at the conclusion. Actually, very interesting. He says that he believed all of the children's genetics, their DNA, their lineage factors were modified, but then he says somehow Sanji's went back to normal. So he doesn't directly say that Sanji was born as a normal human and he was never modified. The way the doctor implied it is that he was, but he went back to being a normal human, and that made Judge very upset. He's just like, "What? You mean I only have 4 superhuman children rather than 5? Whatever, Sanji, I want nothing to do with you." And so they do the whole thing where they lock him into the Iron Mask, throw him into the dungeon, and just say that he died, all right? So yeah, Judge was kind of a shitty dad, just a little bit, right? So, and eventually, you know, Sanji, of course, leaves, he gets on the orbit, and then eventually, you know, the Cook pirates, led by Zeph, attack them, and then he starts working with Zeph, they build the Baratie, and then eventually, you know, Luffy meets him there, okay? So the entire process of this, we're just led to believe Sanji's abilities, his martial arts skill, his ability to use Diable Jambe, you know, all of that was just developed with his own, you know, power as just being a human, all right? He had nothing in terms of modifications in terms of the Germa. But then that last chapter, you know, chapter 1023 kind of, you know, brings up the question there, because Queen is pretty convinced that, no, the reason you can light your leg on fire is because your genetics have definitely been messed with in some way, shape, or form, all right? Maybe not the same exact way or to the same extent that all the other Germa siblings have been, but you've definitely been, your genes have definitely been tinkered with a little bit here, okay? And Sanji, of course, would not want to admit that, because he wants nothing to do with the Germa. As they were leaving Totland, he was, like, looking at his wanted poster, and he's like, "Damn it! It says Sanji Vinsmoke. I don't want anything to do with this anymore." So I guess it's just one of those things where it's like you can't run away from your bloodline, or you can't run away from your family no matter how much you try. Maybe that's the message Oda's trying to spin here. Or rather, he might be trying to say, he's like, yeah, Sanji can never run away from who he is. He is a Vinsmoke, so, you know, he should probably accept that, but that doesn't mean he has to be as bad as his dad was or his brother. That can mean he's a Vinsmoke because his mother was also a Vinsmoke. You know, his mother married Judge, all right? So maybe he can be a Vinsmoke, but he could be the good Vinsmoke, like his mother was, okay? Maybe something along that line, all right? Maybe that's the message Oda is going with here, okay? So here's an interesting idea. What if the way that this works is because the genetic modifications were made to Sora, and I believe Judge as well, like both of their genetic, you know, material was modified in order to give birth to these children. When Sora took all those drugs to try to change it, what if Sanji sort of got this thing where it's like, okay, his lineage factor can actually switch back and forth. So, like, when he was a kid, he started off, like, when he was born, he was genetically modified. But then he got a little older, and his lineage factor went back to being that of a normal human being, with normal human being capabilities. In the One Piece world, of course. But now, because he was using the raid suit, maybe the raid suit also shifted it back again, because another thing Sanji brought up during that battle was, like, my body feels weird. Ever since the second time I used the raid suit, my body's been feeling a little off. Not necessarily weak, or I'm like, gonna pass out or anything like that. It just feels weird, okay? So I'm thinking, what if the Germa, even after Sanji defected and they left, Germa scientists worked on the raid suit, Stealth Black, in order to kind of be like training wheels for Sanji? Or maybe like, what if Judge at one point wanted to have more children that were also genetically modified with like another wife, okay? And if he would, because Sora was dead at that point, but what if it was like another child was born with the same problem as Sanji? Maybe they were developing technology to try to make sure that doesn't happen again. So even if, Judge had kids later down the line and they had the same problems as Sanji's, like, oh, well, we have this raid suit you can wear, and that kind of like gives you the boost that you need in order to awaken your latent potential, all right? So I think that's what Oda's really doing here. The more Sanji wears that raid suit, the more his genetic modifications become, brought to the surface, okay? Something else I wanted to bring up because it is kind of interesting, all right? There's no debate that Sanji is one of the strongest members of the Straw Hat Pirates, okay? Now, you might say that, like, okay, it's no longer Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji. It's now Luffy, Zoro, Jinbei, and Sanji. You might flip both of them around, like, is Sanji the third strongest or the fourth strongest? What if Yamato joins? You could say all that all you want all day. Point is, Sanji's really strong. Can we at least admit that, all right? He's one of the strongest fighters on the crew, okay? He's also a damn good chef, all right? Now, let's think about this. When Sanji was a little kid, he wasn't really that adept at, training that sort of, way for fighting abilities and stuff. He tried his best, but you really got the impression he did not want to become a fighter. He wanted to be a cook. He was interested in cooking and reading books, and, he wasn't interested in being a warrior and a soldier and learning how to fight and martial arts and all that kind of stuff. That wasn't Sanji when he was a kid. He only did it, or he only tried, because Judge and his siblings were kind of picking on him and wanted him to, okay? And so he's like, well, I have to try to make Dad proud, so I'll try to run, It's like, but he really didn't want to do any of that stuff, okay? And then Judge got really mad at him whenever he saw him, cooking food or something for servants or anything. He's just like, that's not what Germa royalty does, and, whatever. So he wasn't really interested in it. Then he left the Germa and he started working on the Orbit. He got no combat training there. He was a chef on a cruise liner, basically, for about 2 years. And then the Cook Pirates show up. Zeph arrives. They do the 30 days on the rock, without any food. And so eventually they get rescued and they go open up the Baratie. Now, yes, Zeph was the captain of a really strong pirate crew that had even went to the Grand Line at one point, right? And of course, Zeph was skilled in the martial arts, like the Brazilian, like, I forget how to pronounce it. Here it is. Like the Brazilian, like, jiu-jitsu, like you use your legs to fight or whatever. Judge was adept at that. So it would make sense Judge would have taught that to Sanji, but I just find it interesting, like, Luffy trained pretty much his entire childhood alongside Sabo and Ace directly to become pirates, to become really strong pirates to head out to sea. Zoro, likewise, trained in swordsmanship ever since he was a little kid at the Shimosuke village, at the dojo, under Koshiro with Kuina. He trained his ass off every single day so he could leave and become the world's strongest swordsman. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me that Sanji would be training in martial arts like all the damn time, every single day at the Baratie, when it really didn't, like, in order, the Baratie was a bunch of really strong, powerful cooks because they had to deal with pirates coming in all the time. So all of the cooks at the Baratie had a little bit of martial arts experience, but it just seems like Sanji, let me put it this way, Sanji did not train probably as hard as Luffy and Zoro did in his formative years, all right? Can you at least maybe agree with that? I mean, maybe a little bit with Zeph, but, like, not as much, all right? His main goal was learning how to cook and bake and be a great chef and, that kind of stuff. Not so much like, I gotta learn how to train to become the strongest warrior ever. Like, that's not Sanji's goal. That's Luffy and Zoro's goal to an extent, but not Sanji's. So what if this is the way it went? Zeph and Sanji build the Baratie, and a bunch of cooks start getting hired, alright? And Zeph kind of walks out sort of like a drill sergeant in the army, and he's like, alright, listen up, you pissant cooks. This is the Baratie, and we have two rules at the Baratie. We cook hard and we fight hard, alright? Because there's gonna be a lot of pirates that are gonna be coming in here, raising a commotion, and we will make a point to serve every single one of them. But it also helps to be able to, fight back if necessary, because this is the high seas after all. So Zeph started putting them on his training regimen, teaching them basic martial arts, and Sanji probably had flashbacks to the Germa, like he doesn't really want to do this, but it's for a different purpose, and so he listened to Zeph. However, Sanji, upon training, and the older and older he got into his teenage years, training in this martial arts style, he was actually really, really good at it when he put his mind to it. And because it wasn't, for the reason that Judge wanted him to get stronger, this is for another reason altogether. Zeph was teaching them. He got a little bit, into the actual training, all right? And so he's like, all right, I want to train to get stronger, okay? And he was just, leaps and bounds above all the other cooks. And Zeph is like, holy crap, this kid's actually got talent, all right? And so Sanji practices a kick and it like levels a wall or something. And Zeph is like, holy crap, kid, that's crazy. Your leg's like a damn cannon. So what if that's the reason? Like, the other Germa siblings, they develop their exoskeletons and their abilities at like age 5 or 6. What if it took Sanji like an extra 10 years or so? So he was a teenager when he actually started developing like these genetic modifications, all right? Because he's like super wicked tough. Remember the time he was fighting against Blueno? And this was before, hockey or anything was involved, but, Blueno's there and he uses his tech eye to like block Sanji's kick, and Sanji starts spinning like crazy and bam! Slams right into Blueno. And Blueno, his tech eye doesn't get broken, but he's like, oh, man, that was close. You almost broke through my tech eye. Sanji did not use Diablo Jambe. He did not use haki at that point or anything. It was just the sheer force of his kick. And the idea of tech eye, and from what we've understood, is that when you use tech eye, you have, like, your skin is as strong as iron, and it's really tough, even tougher than that, honestly. So the idea that Sanji was almost able to injure Blueno, break through his tech eye with sheer force alone, that's like sort of lending to things like Sanji's body is not built like a regular body, you know what I mean? Like there's something else there going on, right? Yeah, there was the one time when he went to go attack the Pacifista PX4, he kicked it really hard, and then he immediately fell to the ground, and he was just like, oh my god, I almost shattered my leg in two by kicking it, right? But that was against Vegapunk's technology, so you can sort of understand why that, like, harmed him the way he did. But still, like, the fact he's able to light his leg on fire and, sustain that heat and, not be injured by the heat and everything like that. 2 years of training at the Kamabaka Kingdom was enough for him to, like, just break a Pacifista's neck with sheer force, okay? That seems to imply that, like, yeah, he does have these modifications, it's just, he has to train a lot harder, so he is kind of behind his other siblings. Oh, by the way, I also wanted to bring that up. There was a question for a while there whether or not the siblings could use their power if they did not have the raid suits on, because it's implied, like, when they have the raid suits, that's when they can use, like, that's when Niji is Dengeki blue, that's when Ichiji is sparking red, right? So, definitely Niji was able to use the electrical abilities without his raid suit on. They were just probably not as strong as if he did have it on, okay? So kind of think of it like that. Like, once again, Sanji is still on training wheels while all the other members of the Vinsmokes have been, like, riding 10-speed bikes for years at this point, right? Like, they're 100% fine, but Sanji was still lagging behind them in that respect. But because he now has the raid suit to help him out, kind of awakening his body's potential, things might really change. Like, after the events of Wano are over, after he defeats Queen, after everything's done, they might be on the Sunny sailing to the next destination, and Sanji's in the middle of, like, cooking, like, hey guys, what do you all want for a celebration for sailing away from Wano? I could cook up some bacon. And then, like, Sanji, like, passes out, and he's like, what's wrong with Sanji? And that's, like, his, like, exoskeleton being formed or something around him, or his body going through modifications, like he passes out or something, and then he wakes up, like, a day later, and he's like, whoa, my whole body feels, like, tingly, like, stronger or whatever, and, like, one kick, which would normally be enough to, like, level a boulder, can now, like, crack a mountain or something like that, like, whoa. And that would be Sanji's power-up going into the final saga of One Piece. But it's also going to be something that he's going to have to kind of come to terms with, like, oh my god, I'm not, it's kind of like the robot realizing like he's actually not a real human. You know, it's just like, it's the robot, it's the android the whole time. It's just like, I'm a regular human. And then it's like its arm gets ripped off and it's like, oh no. Everything I knew was a lie! You know, I was a decoy all along! You know, and so Sanji, I could see him like, you know, he's stronger, so all the other Straw Hats are like, wow, Sanji, you're gonna be really powerful now. But Sanji's like having an existential crisis in the meantime, just like, oh my god. I'm still a Vinsmoke. I can never run from my family. But then maybe you could have a moment where, like, I don't know, you could have a moment where, I'm trying to think of another Straw Hat that could actually kind of, well, you know what? If Yamato ends up joining the Straw Hats, that would actually be a really cool moment where Sanji realizes he has this genetic modifications, like Queen was right, he is a modified human or a cyborg. Maybe you could have a moment where Yamato sits down with him, and Yamato's like, you know, my whole life, I was raised by, you know, an ogre, basically, that wanted me to become, like, the ruler of Wano, and all, like, thrust all these things onto me, and, you know, I can never run from the fact Kaido is my father. I can never outrun him. Like, even if they actually end up killing Kaido during Wano, like, Kaido is still Yamato's dad, and that's just the way Yamato has to accept it, right? And so maybe Yamato could be like, you know what? We are who we are. We're not who our parents want us to be. So even if your parents were horrible, like Yamato would not know the whole story with Sanji and Judge and the Vinsmokes or anything, but, you know, no matter how bad Vinsmoke Judge was, Kaido was way worse. Kaido was like a freaking tyrant ruling over Wano for the last 20 years as like a dragon god, you know, doing all these horrible things, being a Yonko, you know, waging war out on the seas and everything like that. So many dead are under Kaido's thumb. It's insane. And so Yamato would be like, you know, my dad was pretty messed up, but, you know, I am who I am and I'm traveling with the Straw Hats now. And then Sanji could maybe that'll be like, yeah, that makes sense. And then Frankie could show up and be like, Sanji, you're a cyborg too. That's so super. Can you fire lasers? No, Frankie, I don't think. Let's have a laser contest, Frankie. I really don't think I can fire. Bam! And then so, hey, maybe there's a scene where Frankie fires a radical beam at Sanji, and Sanji's like, Frankie, I can't. Boom! And he gets hit by it, and it's like his arms are a little like scarred or like burnt or whatever, but he's just like, wow, that really didn't hurt as much as it should. And so it's like, that's his exoskeleton. That's like the power he has now. Also, I guess you could say he only really awakens the power when he does have the raid suit on. That's when he's at like 100%, like the same as the other Germa. But he could still develop like an exoskeleton, other benefits with his regular body, okay? So, yeah, that would be an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, we could go with that. But yeah, that's the video. I just wanted to bring it up because, I mean, yeah, the stealth black suit, you could just say, well, that's Sanji's power-up for the story. He doesn't need anything else beyond that. But from the way Queen was talking about it, there seems to be something else beyond that. So yeah, let me know below, yes or no, is Sanji a cyborg? Vote now while I cue up the Bat Fact intro. Oh yeah, this is a good one. This is a good one today. Bat Facts. Alright, so today we are talking about the pallid bat. And here's the pallid bat right here, and here's a bunch of little pallid bats. Oh, look at them! They're all huddling together. Those are sleepy bats right there. So these bats are also known as the desert bat because they're primarily found in the American Southwest. They can also go into Mexico as well. And so these bats are 15 to 16 inch wingspan. They're not that big. And there's also something very interesting about them. There's a few interesting things about them. For one thing, they are capable of using echolocation to hunt their prey. However, most of them actually prefer not to use it. So it's like they can, but it's like, we don't need to use echolocation for everything. We have ears. We can just use regular ears. So they just use regular hearing to like detect their prey and swoop down and eat them. Mostly insects like the Arizona bark scorpion seen here, seen being devoured right here. They eat a lot of those. They also emit a skunk kind of odor, like a defense mechanism. So if you see them in the cave and you disturb them, they can release like a foul odor to sort of like deter predators. All right, so that's interesting. The most interesting thing though about these pallid bats that I discovered though is that they are heterothermic. All right, so this led me down a tangent and I learned about something else today. So most of my life, whenever I've heard about animals that are either warm-blooded or cold-blooded, right? Like there's two, you know, warm-blooded animals are like human beings and mammals like cows and tigers and things. And then there's cold-blooded animals like lizards and reptiles that can't maintain their body heat, so they have to get it somewhere else. So while the term homeothermic, which is what humans are, warm-blooded is a thing, the term cold-blooded is sort of like a vernacular. Like, it sort of refers to what these, animals are that are cold-blooded, but not exactly. The correct term is poikilothermic. Okay? And the reason it's called that is because they're not necessarily cold-blooded, it's that their internal temperature changes depending on their environment. So humans are always warm-blooded, all right? If the, internal temperature starts dropping a lot, that's hypothermia, you can die, all right? So our temperature is trying to maintain this homeostasis and homeothermic inside of our bodies, okay? But when it comes to like frogs or snakes, for instance, they don't necessarily have cold blood, it's just they have to adapt to whatever their environments are, okay? So sometimes their environments require them to be a little bit more warm depending on, the area where they're at, getting warmth from like water or like, basking out in the sun, and the seasons could change and they have to modify their internal temperatures. So it's more like warm-blooded and then varying temperature in terms of, your blood. Now, when it comes to these pallid bats, though, they're heterothermic, which means they're both. Which means they can like regulate their body to be constantly warm like humans, but then under certain circumstances, if their environment changes or the seasons change or whatever, it can vary wildly without worrying about hypothermia or hyperthermia or anything like that to where it needs to be. So that's very interesting about these pallid bats that I wanted to bring up, and that is this episode of Bat Facts. Also, I wanted to bring up, the next Shonen Jump is actually released tomorrow. It's an early release this week, so it's Thursday right now where I'm at, so it'll be Friday. It's coming out tomorrow. But also keep in mind, there's no new One Piece chapter this week. And I have another video planned for tomorrow that I was going to do anyway, but I just wanted to bring that up because I just found that out like an hour ago. Like, oh, we're getting an early release this week. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Thanks for watching the video. Tekking, Barry, Sanji, signing out.